I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you. I'm pleasure to be here.
So it took us a little while to get together, but I'm excited. I'm really excited. I like talking to uber successful, award-winning CIOs. So this is a lot of fun.
Thank you.
So let's talk about so people really learn about you. How did you get to where you are today? Maybe we can just talk about a little bit about your trajectory. I'm assuming that you came up through a traditional track. You went IT in college, right through, MBA, and right into this magical position, and you magically appeared years down the road. Exactly who you are.
Well, that's the second chapter of the story, but actually, there's a first chapter. Maybe would be good to share.
I'd love to hear it.
My story, I think, is a little bit unique, perhaps, but really, I think my career, where I am today in my career, actually started long before I started in professional life. And the story here is I funded my own education, as a lot of people do, supporting myself, working full time while taking classes, on the side. And it took me, a good almost 10 years to really finally complete my engineering degree. Now, during that time, in order to, pay my rent and fund my education, I took on a lot of different jobs. Everything from building submarines to painting houses to cleaning banks to working restaurants. And that journey itself actually turned out to be the best foundation that I could have had, bringing me into the next phase of my profession.
Hold on, we gotta pause the tape a little bit right now. So I heard submarines, and I hear So first of all, you took 10 years staying with it to get an engineering degree.
Yes.
That's like a dog and a bone. That's like a lot of stick-to-itiveness. You must have had a significant reason why did you want your degree so badly, and why were you willing to stay with it for 10 years?
I think it was because I loved the opportunity to learn, and in working through those jobs, I understood the power of higher education. I knew that, I would have choices, and I loved learning, and I really wanted to be able to continue to grow and have a career. And so I was uniquely motivated, but I enjoyed it. And I think that's really the thing that kept me and helped me persevere.
So you're in the Connecticut area, right?
I'm in New York City, but I also spend time in Connecticut.
Because you mentioned submarines, and I'm thinking, God, hold on, there's a submarine base on the way up. I'm from Boston, so you travel up through that area, and then I'm like, there's Groton, and then there's like a lot of submarine stuff going on.
Exactly. There's General Dynamics runs a very large submarine base there, which is how I came to be employed there.
Really?
One of my first jobs, actually, right out of high school.
So have you ever gone down in a submarine?
No, only in what we call the dry dock, where they're building them or repairing them.
So what's your fondest memory of being around and on submarines?
Well, this is easy because this is another part of my story. That's actually where I met my husband of 30 odd years. So that's my favorite story. Who would have thought, all these years later, but it just turned out to be one of those magic days.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really great. Well, I don't want to just stick with the submarine story. I'm sure that you have some other fun ones to tell, but basically you had this 10 years for you was really important for setting the foundation for really who you are and how you grew up, as it is for a lot of us, but those first 10 years out of high school. But I'm curious, so what were some of the things you learned in that 10 years that you think were really foundational, other than your degree that you got with engineering? Like what were some of the other experiences that you found have been really helped you out in a big way later on in your career?
Yeah, there are a couple things, and I didn't know this at the time, right? This is the wisdom of X number of years later, and it really took me a long time to put these pieces together. But let me explain a few examples. For several years I worked in the restaurant business, and so at the time I thought, well, I'm just making money, wanting to get tips to pay my rent. But actually, in hindsight, what I was really learning was I was learning how to sell. I was learning about the quality of products, of food, of wine. I learned about the differentiation of service. And I learned about, working with many, many different types of people. I learned about time management and conflict management. And who would have thought that from being a bartender or a waitress, but actually they're all there and I use them. We all use them, right? Every day now. And, it took me a while to reflect that those were the nuggets that I was unintentionally gaining along the way that I use today. And as I said earlier, the other nugget was I realized that, key for me was going to be to continue my higher education. And I had a thirst for that because I was working very hard to have that privilege. So the very privilege of education made it even more of a passion for me.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's some nights coming home at, after closing the bar at 2 a.m, going to Denny's, for the eggs over my hammy, that was the eggs over in front of Denny's. But but some of the powerful lessons you can learn in the restaurant environment. I was talking to my kids about that. Holy moly. My first mentor out of in the technology business was a very successful entrepreneur. He said, what I learned to keep everybody's glasses full of water before they even asked. And he goes, and I thought, what a service, what a service mentality he learned so early.
That's right. So you don't realize it, but I think that actually ties to another really important concept, for me, which is actually just some papers came out on this, which is, the notion of intentional learning. And so the idea being that in the course of every day, there is some nugget, there is something to learn and take and apply to your life and your profession. And I think that's just an example of that coming to life for me.
Yeah, you were commenting before we got started about the Davos paper about how the biggest impact. Maybe you can share that. Why did that impact you so much? About that Davos paper?
Because they touch on this. This is a reference to a McKinsey report, which was on the Davos agenda just recently, and they talked about intentional learning as being the most critical skill to acquire and thrive in the digital age, and that just got my attention. But what really got my attention about it is, intentional learning is really nothing more, and I'm paraphrasing here, but really nothing more than having a natural curiosity and wanting to grow. And I just love that. That's, throughout my career, the transitions that I've made have always been for that reason, because I'm like, I want to go over there. I don't know much about that, but I want to figure that out. And so that's what struck me about it. And I think closely related to this also on the Davos agenda was the global, emergency that we have around upskilling. And I know that's a very familiar topic, but again, that comes back to learning and having the ability to learn. And I think this is something we have to do better collectively, right? As a global community. So that's why it resonated for me. I have this great quote I would like to share with you.
Sure.
And then I'll leave it. But when you learn a little, you feel you know a lot. But when you learn a lot, you realize you know very little. And that's a quote from Dr. Daniel Amen, who is a psychiatrist and an author who specializes in brain health. And I think that's true.
Yeah, I know Dr. Amen's work a lot, and he promotes a lot with MRI brain scans and really the brain health for sure. And I think it's important because we are going to be needing to work a lot longer than previous generations, and we have to keep ourselves super healthy for longer periods of time, and our attitudes and perceptions about learning and retirement have to shift as well.
Yeah, and I think at the same time, when we think about this next, decade of this revolution that we're in, we also have to think more flexibly. You think about, the merging of technologies and the merging of business and the level of disruption. Like, you have to have that intellectual agility to be able to thrive in that environment, or certainly some resilience, I think, too.
Has it made it up in your organization to a board level yet, Beth, or is this something you're percolating and getting ready for the board to ask you these type of questions moving forward?
It's a good question. It's made it to the board in the sense of I'm going through a massive transformation for my team. And so I put on the board agenda a goal for us to upskill 50% of our workforce. So it has made it to the board agenda. And the devil's in the details, right? It's one thing to say that, but then you really got to roll up your sleeves. That's how do you do that? Because I think we also have to think about the nature of skills and how you recruit skills, and maybe challenge some of the assumptions some of us have been dragging around for years, that you need that 4-year college degree or you need to be a specialist in technology. So it's definitely on the agenda. I think it's a really kind of gnarly problem to solve, though, because it's got to be a combination of education, skills, thinking about human talent differently.
On my board is she runs a university down in South Carolina, and she was the former CIO of Johnson & Johnson. So she was the CIO of 40 CIOs, 40 like multi-billion-dollar companies under Johnson. So it's really, she's a lot of fun. And I think the best way for universities to change, and I haven't shared this with her yet, but I think, and I was in a conference last week, and it sparked, schools should not be selling us 4 years degrees. They should be selling us lifetime degrees. And I think that the schools of the future, you're going to sign up for a lifelong learning track that you will be able to engage with a variety of learning modes, VR, the Zoom type models, physical. And I think that's the future. I think that's going to be the future of college education.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think that's a whole industry ripe for disruption as well. I think it'll be a combination of that. I also think that, you see it now already. There's a lot of free courseware out there. There's just so much more access to it. And I think different partnerships between educational institutions and businesses are also something that has to really strengthen well beyond the interns or things like that. I think we have to have much more sophisticated, integrated models between educational institutions and businesses.
Speaking of Eamon, Dr. Eamon, have you looked at VR yet?
Yes, we actually, we literally are just, toying around, but we have the Oculus, and we're exploring. Well, very interesting, very intriguing.
I have my Oculus on the ground over there. I was just in an event last week where we were in Oculus and in a 3D model that had been created for this event. And then there's also, we were experimenting with this event with it was essentially a deeper, it wasn't quite as immersive as the Oculus, but it was a bridge point. I would call it a bridge between, because now Facebook's shipping those Ray-Bans where you basically can have the computer screen on the inside of your glasses. And I think that immersive experience, but from a neuroscience perspective, the ability for your brain to light up is just so huge. And I think we're at the cutting edge of that. I think we're right where the internet was in 1995 when Gates and Netscape, and Andreesen were fighting over the browser. I think we're right at that point with VR right now.
Oh, I love that. I love that analogy. I think you're absolutely right.
So that's really neat. So this upskilling is big, and it sort of hits at your ethos of how you learned, kind of a lifelong learning and multidimensional learning through your career.
Definitely, I think it's essential.
What about mentorship? Like how have you pursued, or your mentors that are your models for you? And then how do you mentor your team in your organization?
Yeah, I've been very, very fortunate to have outstanding mentors, people, that I could trust, that would give me the hard talk and really be my consultation, but also pick me up and push me on when I needed to, right? And you need that combination as a mentor. So I've been very, very fortunate. One of the things that I try to do is really go deep into the organization and mentor at the entry level, and maybe one level above. And I do that for a couple of reasons. Some of these individuals think it's a great favor, but what they don't realize is the favor is mine. They're doing me a favor, because by doing that, I can understand and learn from what the future pipeline of talent of the organization needs, right? If I can have an impact, that's where I can probably have the biggest impact. That's number one. And number two, the double down impact of that is I can also understand how well are they getting leadership and guidance from my leadership team. And so the second benefit to that is I know where I can go in and further develop my leaders to be better leaders and managers. So I get a lot of value and insight out of going deeper in the organization. And I think as we all try to flatten our organizations, it becomes less of a point. But I think I will always do that because it's paid off
Yeah.
in so many ways.
That's interesting. There's a great Team of Rivals, the book that I forgot who wrote it, but it was about Abraham Lincoln and how when he formed his cabinet, he formed basically the cabinet with all of his rivals from the race. But then that wasn't really as interesting as the fact that during the battles, he was going down to the front lines. Like he was getting so much disinformation from his commander that he had the courage to actually drive himself, and I guess they didn't drive them, but he took a boat down to the front lines multiple times to get from the troops level. And I thought, I've remembered that. And that takes courage because, well, let me ask you, I think courage and risk is one of the things that you and I had talked about. And I think one of the things that is kind of looking at your trajectory is taking courage and having risk. Is it risky to go deep into your organization, but to get that really coach people and mentor them at that level?
It can be risky. There's no question about it because, you don't, first of all, you don't want to have an inference that there's some people worth spending time with and there are others that aren't, and you can't do that. So there's the obvious risk around that. There's also a risk that they will tell you things that you actually can't fix, right? So then what do you do? So, there are definitely risks. But if we abstract it beyond this, this particular scenario, I think risk is a really important part of managing your career. I don't think all of the growth that I've had in my career is because I had the courage or the impetus and the support to take a risk.
Sure.
And I think if you're not taking risks, then you're probably not reaching your full potential. And I'm not a risk taker by nature. But what makes me get more comfortable with doing that is learning to manage them. Like, it doesn't all have to be a big blowout. Like there's calculated risks, there's your tolerance. And so that's what I think, that's how I approach risk.
That could be the second quote after Eamon's quote, but this is the Beth quote. If you're not taking risks, you're probably not reaching your full potential. But there's no truer words have been spoken. And it's interesting too because now one other winner that's been on my podcast recently. She is out of the DC area, and she said that she's used the Corona timeframe to reach. You can get a lot done in 10 minutes. But she will literally call down into her organization on Zoom, deep into the organization, and just have 10-minute calls with people. It's super practical. You don't have to be roped into long conversations with people. It's just, you can have 10 minutes, you can have 6 conversations an hour. You can cover a lot of ground. It's a really interesting capability of reaching deep into the organization to sort of get intel on what's happening.
And that creates a channel of communication. That creates a communication loop. Right. First of all, you're not just calling people and they're like, uh-oh, what happened? Right. And then secondly, you're opening up that so that they might feel like, hey, I'm just going to pop over and call up so-and-so. And I think that's the sort of, one of the fundamentals to a healthy culture is that people are accessible. They can talk to you.
Totally. And that's knocking down those doors and just creating those lines of communication is what you've done. Well, that's good. That's great. So tell me, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I want to make sure that I cover the kind of some important precepts that you have. And I know you had kind of a couple principles that you and I talked about prior to recording. And I'd love for you to spend a couple minutes because I think they're impactful for you to talk about them. Would you mind talking about those 3 key principles?
Yeah, the 3 principles. I think that they're the things that motivated me, and in reflection, there are things that I think can be helpful to others, perhaps. And so the first one is what I talked about a little earlier, which is, adopt that learning mindset. Really be open, more than just open. Be aggressive around wanting to learn new things, and it's really never been easier. I have 3 or 4 podcasts. I'm going to the grocery store. I got 10 minutes. I can learn something new in 10 minutes. Now, granted, it's only 10 minutes worth, but if I really love it, I'm going to go get the hour version or the 2-hour version. Have a curiosity, and you can pick what it is. It could be non-work related, and a lot of the things that I do explore and try to learn or gain new skills on are not immediately directly related to my job, but they tend to loop back. So I think the first principle is be curious, be passionate about learning new things and understanding new things, because that can lead to places you just didn't even see coming, like my restaurant example. So that's the first one. I think the second thing is and this is hard. It took me a while to learn this. Don't chase a role. Don't chase a spot on the org chart. Chase a passion. Follow your curiosity, and do it because you do want to learn new skills, or you want to understand a different perspective or a different experience. Because the reality is roles are very different and they're fleeting. But if you're chasing down what you love to do or what you're interested in, that's going to lead to good places. You're going to land in a good spot because it's been
Right.
proven, happy people are very productive. And if you're learning and you're happy, you're going to be productive. You're going to be successful. And then the last thing was the risk to mention that we talked about already.
Yeah.
So it has to come with some risk.
Yeah, I love that. Well, this is great. Is there anything in particular that you were hoping to want to cover that I didn't ask you about today, Beth?
I don't think so. I just really appreciate the opportunity, and I love your podcast. Back to my 10-minute, 30-minute, 40-minute example. I'm learning a lot still every day, and I really enjoy having the opportunity and to meet with the rest of this group as well. So thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome. You're welcome. There's a lot of nuggets of wisdom that get shared. We just talked about many here today, and so it's my job to carve this up and make sure we serve this out for people to digest, because I think we can all learn from each other. It's part of our own reskilling in many respects.
Thank you.
Learning in the future. So thank you for your time, Beth.
My pleasure, and same to you. Thank you.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.